Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Ari Kaplan, principal of Ari Kaplan Advisors, the opportunity maker whose 30-year commitment to connecting people and amplifying voices has made him one of legal technology's most trusted community builders and connectors.
Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm your host, Tom Martin, and I am thrilled today to have on Ari Kaplan, who is the principal of Ari Kaplan Advisors, and he basically shares his wealth of knowledge in terms of training people, professionals about technology, keynoting, writing wonderful articles. He has a podcast with over 1,000 episodes, so I'm very jealous. And he is an all-around fantastic guy. Ari, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome, and thank you so much for being on the show. Just for the benefit of you, the audience, Ari and I ran into each other in New York City at the inaugural Legal Innovators New York that Richard Truman's threw with cosmonauts, and that was pretty fun. It was you, me, and Mr. Schnurman.
David Schnurman. Yes,
Yeah.
That's right. Right.
Yeah, and it was kind of cool because like we had talked, but we hadn't met in person before, and it's always great to have events like that bring you together.
Yeah, it's the serendipity. That's what you miss sometimes in the virtual world. The serendipity of you, David Schnurman, me, just sitting there enjoying a fantastic event and getting to reconnect. It was wonderful.
Yeah, and so you're based in New York City. The conference that we were at was in New York City. Are you like inundated with snow right now? Is it totally freezing? Like, what is it like there?
You know what? I don't love the winter. I mean, I love where I live. I actually live in a suburb of New York City. I live in New Jersey, and I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, but I live in New Jersey. And for over the holidays and over New Year's, it was incredibly cold, like unseasonably cold, even for the winter. But now it's kind of warmed up a little bit, almost early spring, even like 50s. So not terrible, and pretty sunset I'm looking at, and some trees with no snow on it. So it's nice, but it's been a cold winter so far.
Yeah, I mean, 50s in January is pretty decent.
Oh yeah, almost balmy.
Yeah, let's not jinx it, right? But so what are you up to now? Like what's kind of going on in your life at this moment?
I'm excited to start the year. I actually have a tradition that I started 30 years ago, and this is a theme for me. We just talked about this, but 30 years ago around New Year's, I decided I was going to keep a journal that I write in once a year. And because I felt like it's so powerful to be able to reflect and to look forward. And so every year I write in that journal. And at the time, I was just sort of meandering in my thoughts. But now, 30 years later, when I look at it, it's pretty remarkable just in terms of at the time I was in law school. I was like, oh, I hope I get a job. And then I got a job and I was like, wow, I got a job. Can I pay back my loans? Can I ever make a living? Oh, I'm dating this girl and I really like her. And we've been married now 25 years. We're thinking of having a child. One of those children has graduated college already and the other's a junior and just went abroad. And so even just my career, I'm thinking of leaving my firm. And I just hope that I don't know, I'm going to try it. You need to take a risk in this life. It's just funny to hear myself thinking about stuff. So what's going on now is that I'm in that process. Always at the very beginning of the year, I'm always in this moment of like reflecting, wow, what a great year. How much interesting things have transpired and how lucky I am to be involved in them. And then like, what does this year look like? Where am I headed? Do I have some preliminary plans and can I build on those? So it's very much a reflection and a projection sort of moment.
That's a wonderful thing to do. And I mean, it's extraordinary too what you're talking about. Like you talk about it like it's just something you do, which it is. But I know for myself speaking personally that I don't know that I would be able to pull that off. Like I haven't, obviously. It's too late now for me to do that. But like, but the fact that you like have just had this discipline of doing it, committing your thoughts to writing every day, or like,
No, no. Once, so the beauty of this journal is that
okay,
I only write in it once a year, right around New Year's. I try to commit to New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. I ne almost never do that. And actually, it's early January. I have not written it yet because I want to get myself into a point where I can like really dedicate several hours of just focus and thinking. And at the beginning of the year, that tends to be difficult. And certainly, it's difficult at the end of the year where you want to kind of check out. But every year I do it, and it's interesting. People always say, "Oh, what would you tell yourself?" Or what would your this year self say to you now? And actually, I have this journal that kind of tells me that, and it's really funny. And it's like, oh, you can imagine you're thinking about your life and saying, "Am I where I should be?" But then when you read about what you wrote 20 years ago, where you would hope to be, you're almost always exceeding that. Just,
yeah.
oh, yeah, I hope I can afford to live in a place. I hope I can afford to send my kids to college, that kind of thing. And so once you've done that and you read about it, you're like, huh, this is pretty good. So a little pat on the back. So it's been fun. Or it also holds you accountable. You read and you see your like, I've been talking about writing another book for many years, and so I've written two, and I've talked about writing another one, and this journal sort of kind of reminds me that every year I'm like, oh, this is the year, but it isn't. And so it's a funny, to be honest about it with yourself, and to hold yourself accountable to things. It's a nice little exercise. So I encourage people to do it.
Well, I could definitely use your insight about writing a book because I'm like in the middle of it right now, and it's just really, really nuts. But I do admire like even like the yearly look back, look forward. Yeah, I haven't done that. I know that there's probably a lot of people out there that are like even that. Yeah, is that's fantastic that you've done that and can see and kind of share over your history like where things have gone, because obviously where we've been in a lot of ways dictates where we are now and where we're going. And in that vein, let's talk a little bit about your origin stories. The audience knows I love to get into people's background, and I want to talk about yours. You, as you just mentioned, grew up in Brooklyn, right?
Yep. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm born and raised, and my wife also grew up in Brooklyn, and I'm still closest with all of my friends that I went to high school with in Brooklyn. So it's a funny thing. But yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to public school, high school, and it was it was great. When I think about it now, what was wonderful, I have to say, I grew up in a middle class. If you, I don't even know if it was less than middle class, but it was sort of in a neighborhood where you didn't know that you didn't have things. It's funny if your car wasn't, some kid's car wasn't dented, they were rich. They had a four-head VCR. You were like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, but everyone's house looked the same. There were row houses. There wasn't this sort of stratification of wealth, at least where I grew up. And, you played with kids in everywhere, and everyone was friends. It was actually a really nice way to grow up. I mean, maybe I'm uh, making it sound a little nicer than it was. You had to be street smart, of course, but I thought it was great. And, I had a wonderful family, and, my parents were great and encouraged me. It's funny because I've dedicated, I think, both my books to, I think the first book I think I dedicated in part to my parents, of course, to my wife. But
Yeah.
because my first book is called The Opportunity Maker, and I just felt like my parents were very supportive of allowing me to create opportunities and to sort of giving me the tools to do that. And so, and have, always inspired me. My dad was an incredible sort of my dad was incredibly handy, which is uncommon amongst my friends. And so I'm very much like a Mr. Fix-It, if you will. My wife always jokes, I've disassembled our dryer, fixed our washing machine, took our printer apart, fixed our refrigerator. Like, not that we have bad appliances, but you get a refrigerator in the garage, you're like, oh, I gotta fix that. And so it's just funny. My dad would always. I'll say that one thing about my dad is he would always, when I was a kid, he'd always ask me to hold the flashlight. Like anything
Okay.
he did, he would do plumbing or electrical work or carpentry, and he'd always ask me to hold the flashlight. And I hated this job, and it was super annoying. And then sometimes he'd be outside, like fixing a hose or some piping outside or cutting something, and he'd ask for the flashlight. And I'd be like, why is this dude asking me for a flashlight? We're outside. You don't need a flashlight. And I only learned as an adult, and so many years later, especially I'd always call my dad when I fixed something, that he didn't really need the light. He just wanted me to focus and learn. And I sort of have a career doing that now because, so I do a lot of research and produce a lot of content that's meant to kind of gives me access to have conversations with people. And then I take all of those conversations in the aggregate and try to shape them into lessons learned or best practices. And I think a lot of that has to do in many ways to sort of holding the flashlight. Now I'm just sort of like holding the flashlight on different points and then sharing what I know. And my mom is a social worker. She's actually 81. I don't think she'd mind me telling people that. And she still works full time as a social worker.
Wow.
And even
Good
during the
for her.
pandemic was, she works in a hospital. So during the pandemic, she was going in every day and, with masks, and she was just she's amazing. Like I think that I'm grateful to the hospital that employs her, and I'm grateful to the fact that she's found something that she's so passionate and just skilled at that she still does it and goes every day. She works full time. So really, she's remarkable.
Well, it sounds like you've had some amazing influences from your parents.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I'm lucky that way.
and I love the metaphor about the flashlight. Like I could actually I was starting to visualize you with like a flashlight on your belt where you're just like, Dad's gonna call.
At any moment, you'd be like, "Call the light." But
Yeah,
what's fascinating is as I got older and I bought a home, my dad and I we moved in, and the minute we moved in, I like disassembled the entire kitchen. I took all the cabinets down one by one, and then we took them out. And my dad and I put up the kitchen again. And my wife's like, "What are you guys doing?" And I was like, "Nah, it's just what we do." Like it was very
yeah.
funny, and I used to always call him and be like, "Dad, you won't believe this, but the refrigerator broke, and I realized, there's a motherboard in the back. I ordered it on Amazon. I put it in." Refrigerator fixed. I'm like a hero, but actually it was just sort of very obvious in terms of, what the problem was. It was funny.
Well, one of the first steps is when we go to college, and I see, when I was researching you that we're contemporaries, we were, going to university around the same time. And you went to Boston University, got a degree in economics. And was that something like, in high school that you're interested in, or is it something that you kind of figured out when you were there? Like how did that come about?
You know, Something interesting that I think that is connected to this is that I actually started college when I was 16.
Wow.
I started high school when I was 12. And I'm not we've met in person. I'm not a large guy. I'm 5'10", if I'm lucky. And then so imagine starting high school when you're 12 years old. You're like a little guy. My voice, I had my bar mitzvah in high school. My voice didn't change till I was like a junior. And so then I go over to Boston University and I'm like, well, I was so excited, but I'm 16 years old. I'm living in Boston. It was a wonderful experience. But when I was a kid, my kids always joke, my son especially jokes that, like all of my friends and I were always trying to get out, right? We grew up in a nice place, but you were striving to get to a higher place.
Yeah.
And so there were not all these amazing opportunities. You were a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, right? An architect. There were like very specific kinds of roles if you wanted to go into a professional kind of experience. And I realized, just taking science classes in high school that I wasn't going to be a doctor. And so I thought, being a lawyer would be really awesome. And so that I always knew I was going to go to law school. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And I thought doing only pre-law courses would probably not serve me if I ended up changing my mind and wanted to do something in business or some other professional
Hmm.
pursuit. And so I actually did a double major in economics and political science.
You knew that you wanted to go to law school.
For sure. My wife
Eh,
too. It's funny. I feel like a lot of our friends who ended up, at least in that era, who wanted a professional pursuit and thought they were going to go to law school, kind of knew right away. And I'm finding even some of my kids' friends, because my son is out of college and my daughter's almost finished with college, she's a second semester junior. Uh, and so I find even a lot of her friends already know, but I don't think they knew when I knew. Like I kind of
hmm.
knew in high school I was going to pursue a career that would take me into law.
So hopping back to that time,
Hmm.
was there something like was there an influence that pushed you in that direction, or was it just like, hey, this feels like the right thing for me? Like, what happened?
Yeah, I wish I could say that there was some inspire. I mean, I had several inspirations as a lawyer, but when I was a child, a teenager, I don't think there was someone in particular who I was like, I want to be like that person. I just felt like the law would be a means to something different, and I was right. And notwithstanding all the different things that people say about the law, I always say, the law has been good to me. Knock
Mm,
wood, and I say that about my wife too, who remarkably still practices. She started a law practice when our son was born, and that was 22 years ago. She's a gifted, much smarter, better lawyer than I ever was, but she's an incredible advocate, a gifted litigator, and so is a sought after counselor for folks, and started a firm 22 years ago, and it's just an
yeah.
incredible inspiration.
But it's not like, you were really argumentative, Ari, and that's why people said, hey, you make a good lawyer.
No, but I like debating. I like the things about the law. It's interesting. I've been lucky, really, as a result of my first book, The Opportunity Maker, to speak at over 50 law schools, and I've been invited to speak at over 50 law schools, and I'm really proud of that. And every once in a while, a student will ask a question, and or I'll speak at a university, and there'll be pre-law students there, and they'll say, do you recommend this going into legal? I don't like, or I'm thinking of going to law school. I've been accepted to law school, whatever. And like, I don't like speaking, and I don't like writing, and I don't
Mm.
like arguing, and I don't like, all the, and I'm like, well, I feel like you've chosen poorly. Like this is not your profession. And now there are other opportunities. The law is really quite vibrant in this moment. It's not just lawyers anymore, lawyers and paralegals, partners and associates. It's not this sort of binary kind of profession. It's just like this wonderful just palette of opportunities that I think is just extraordinary. So now I don't know that I answer the question the same way anymore, but it's it's a real commitment, and I felt like I had some of those qualities and interests when I pursued this career.
And I love the part that you're kind of broadcasting for a little farther down the road, but just like the interdisciplinary like mix of it, of what's available now, and some of the career steps that you took, which I definitely want to talk a little bit about. But before we get there, you went to George Washington afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
you said that there were some influences there. What were some of those that you remember that maybe inspired you?
So I was a work study student, and I worked it's funny, when you're a work study student, at least then, so I started college in 1989, they assigned you a job. So I was a work study student, and I was the equipment room supervisor at the gym. So I would hand people basketballs, and people thought this was the greatest job because you basically did nothing. And every once in a while, someone said, "Can I have a basketball?" You give them a basketball, but otherwise, you could sit there, and there were no phones like what we're thinking of, but you could do your work or read.
Yeah.
And everyone thought that was amazing. And I thought that was a terrible job because I learned nothing. And it was a very low paying job. And I went to the work study office and I said, how do these jobs work? I got this job automatically, but are there other opportunities? They're like, yeah, here's a book of jobs. And I was like, well, how is the book arranged? And they said the book is arranged by salary. And I said, what does that mean? They said, well, the lowest salary is in the front, highest salary paid
Yeah.
jobs that you're qualified for will be in the
No,
back. And I
open
was like,
open
great.
it
So
to
I
that.
just I started in the back and I was like, what? Who would start in the front? Didn't make any sense to me. And I opened it up and there was this job to be the assistant to the law librarian. And I still remember his name. His name was Dan Freeling. He was just wonderfully generous and knew that I was interested in going to law school. I remember this is my first year, my first semester of college. He knew I wanted to go to law school and tried to give me research assignments and other projects that he thought would be helpful for me to understand what legal might be about and what the law was about. And then that work study ran out at the end of the year. And so the next year I did the same thing and got a job teaching English to adults on a program called the Intergenerational Literacy Project that Boston University at the time had a partnership with the Chelsea Public Schools. And so we would take a van, a bunch of students would take a van, and half the group would teach students, children, and half the group would teach parents, adults. And because they were doing this research, which proved that literacy is very much an intergenerational pattern type of exercise, so that if
Mm.
parents read to their children, children will grow up and be better readers, do better in school, have more opportunities. Just even if the reading was imperfect, the idea of sitting with a child and opening a book and just going through the motions and practicing what it looks like to read and go across words on a page and ask about words and just guess, anticipate what's in a picture, guess what's going to come next. All of that seems very natural to all of us. But for new readers and also adults who are not literate or are perfectly literate, but just in a different language and have come to the United States and need to know English, it's a powerful, exercise with your child. And so I was very lucky to get involved in this program and then did that for the rest of my college career. And that was just incredibly impactful. I not only did I teach the adults English, who were each one of them more inspiring than the one before, but I also was lucky to do research with the lead professors in the program, and so was able to really study what does literacy mean and how does literacy evolve and who's more prone to be literate, what tactics and what activities can you follow. And so it was a very lucky experience and opportunity, and it sort of helped shape a little bit of what I thought I might do in terms of practicing or what I might be interested in my life in terms of being part of a community that cares and thinks of others. And it was just it paid great. It was like a great job, and it was obviously great for my resume, because then what happened was I went abroad my junior year, first semester, came back, I saw a note on the wall. It said, teach English in Czechoslovakia. And I
Hmm.
thought, wow, that's crazy. I'm going to apply. And I applied to teach English in what was then called Czechoslovakia for the summer and never heard anything back. And then right before my last final exam, someone called me and said, we have an opportunity for you. It's in like some city south of Prague, but the catch is this is, remember, the summer of 1991, 1992. Communism fell
Mm.
1989, right? Like you're
Right.
talking about a very early period of this country in its, sort of move.
Transition.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so they said we'd only be able to really guarantee you had the job if you came to Prague. And I was like, I'm sorry, what do you mean? And they said, you have to fly here and come here, and then we'd kind of be able to guarantee that you have something to do here. But unless you come here, we can't really make any guarantees. And I thought, that is insane. Okay. And I did it. I was a lifeguard every summer on the beach in Queens, in Rockaway Beach. It's called Reese Park. And so I was a beach lifeguard. So I knew I could take the test and get that job and work until if this materialized, because those jobs start in May and this wouldn't start until July. And so my supervisors were okay with it, and I ended up leaving and spending the summer in different summer camps teaching English in Czechoslovakia. So I taught English in Boston and then taught English that summer in Czechoslovakia. And so between college and law school, I spent a year living in Japan and taught English on the JET program. So I lived in a city, a suburb of Kobe,
Wow.
teaching in a Japanese high school. Yeah, it was super fun. So a lot of those things sort of helped shape me.
Yeah, and a couple of the things, a couple of the threads that I get from that are not like asking questions, not going along with the assumptions of, hey, this is the way it is. You actually ask questions about the job and
Yeah,
smartly like found a better position.
yeah, that's
Found,
right.
but not just the position. It wasn't just the pay, but it was like the person that you got to work with was an amazing influence, right?
Yeah, extraordinary. Even
And
to
that
this
was,
day.
and that just came from asking a simple question, not accepting, the assumption, and then also by just taking risks, like,
Yeah, some calculated risks, and also,
yeah,
listening. But like my parents, I was at the time, I think 18, maybe I just turned 19. And my parents were like, we don't think that you should do this. Like, you're going to fly to Prague, Czechoslovakia, like by yourself and not know if you have a job. And even if you
right.
did have a job, how would we get in touch with you? Like, how will that work? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. But I went to Boston by myself. Like, why is this so? And I was already, I'd gone abroad. So I'd been in, and I actually had taken a day trip with a buddy of mine to Prague. We
Mm,
did a little travel. We did a lot of traveling when we were abroad. So it wasn't like I had not been anywhere at the time. No one in my family had ever had a passport, other than I did when at the time. So it was they were not really familiar with travel like that. Also, it was Eastern Europe at the time. And
Right.
so it was amazing. Yeah, I agree. I think some calculated. I mean, I wouldn't want my kids to be like, "Hey, Dad, I'm going." If they did that. Although they could FaceTime me from anywhere now. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a totally. I would have to call my mother on the MCI card that she got me to call her, or what did people do? You'd call, collect call from. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. And
Yeah.
then they'd be like, "No, I don't accept the charges," and you just
Right.
hang up. Or I don't, So I just think that it was different. But yes, I think you're right. Ask questions, take some calculated, maybe
Calculated risk.
safe
Yeah.
risks, at least at certain points.
Well, so after law school, your transition was into some, you know, straightforward traditional type jobs. You worked at a couple of firms, and then it got interesting. But in terms of the couple of firms, like just just generally, like what was your feeling about that? Your reaction to working in that kind of environment? Did it feel to you like, hey man, this just isn't for me? Like what was your sense of it?
I used to speak at a lot of law schools. I don't do as much anymore, but I often start by telling people that I was a terrible law student. Like terrible. But I was always a hustler, like in the most positive way, and managed to my second summer. So I had a perfectly fine first year, but I wasn't sure I was going to go back. But once you're in, you borrow that money and you're like, I have to see this through. And so I made a deal with myself. I actually went for like this very long walk and with a pen and paper and wrote down notes of like commitments to myself. If I was going to now go back for my second year, I had to make certain commitments and, made kind of a deal with myself. And one of them was that for my second summer, because I had all this international experience, I was like, I'm going to get a job at the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, or the UN. Those were my four, and I wrote them down. I wonder if I still have those. I tend to keep things, but I'm not sure if I kept that little notepad. And so I applied for these things because the UN's in New York, the State Department's in DC, but maybe there was an opportunity in New York somewhere. And so I applied for those positions, and then early in the maybe late winter, early spring, I get a call from the Office of Foreign Missions at the State Department that happened to be stationed, I think, at the UN. I'm trying to remember. And I got a call from the leader there. She was really kind and said, "We'd like to have you do an internship here." And I thought, amazing. It was unpaid, and I would be able to then live at home because I could live with my parents. And then her colleague called from DC, the chief legal counsel in that office called me and said, "Ari, I know you spoke to my colleague. She really liked you. We'd like you to stay in DC and work at the Maine State Department in our office." And I thought, wow, that's amazing. But, I can't do this. It's not paid and I have to live. He's like, "No, this is a paid position. And, if you come in, we'd like to meet you." And I was like, paid position. I'm a terrible law student. Like it was just fascinating to me. And I ended up taking that job. And I ended up staying there my entire third year. And the greatest part of it was not telling people you worked in the State Department, was not the money. It was that in Washington, D.C. at the time, I'm not sure if it's still the same way, but your key to really being part of this city was having one of these silver ball chains around your neck with a badge that had some designation on it because everyone in DC works in the government, and so I was like I belonged. It was so, and I would like wear it every once in a while. I'd like wear it to class. I'd be like, "You're a loser, Ari. What are you doing?" And I put it in my pocket. I'd be coming from work because I worked during the school year, and it was just just so many great things about that experience that I still periodically call. I remember, I forget the last time we had a conversation, but still periodically call my old boss and wish him a happy birthday or just, catch up with him. And it's it changed in my life in a lot of ways. It was really, really a special opportunity.
Really awesome.
Yeah. Oh, so you asked me, so long story short, because I feel like I'm telling you lots of long stories, but long story short, what happened was during the course of that period, I met several lawyers because we were involved in several activities, and my boss was always kind to take me with him on a meeting here or to go here, an event, a reception, meeting ambassadors. It was just really cool. And I met a lawyer in DC from a firm in New York. And I asked him, we got along very well. And I asked him, would you consider giving my resume to your New York office? I'm going to need a job when I graduate and I want to go home. And he said, sure. And I got a letter from this partner and it said, Ari, we've received your resume. We don't have anything right now, but we'll keep your resume on file, which I just assumed, well, it was like somebody
Yeah.
crunching up my resume and tossing it in the garbage.
Right.
And then sure enough, I took the bar exam. And right after the bar exam, I get a call. Someone left. We'd like to interview you. And I remember my girlfriend at the time was like, that's crazy. She could not because she already had a job because she's a genius. I married her. And she was like, I hope this guy gets a job. Her parents like, I hope he gets a job. And so I got this, I get this interview and I get this job, and I just could not believe it. It turned out that the partner went to GW Law School.
Okay.
So that's just a way of connecting the alumni thing. I always stress that to folks. Like every time someone says, I'm looking for an opportunity or I'm thinking of changing, and I'm like, have you really like looked into your alumni network, whether it's college, whether it's law school? Because even when I invite people, and I host a series of dinners for corporate leaders or law firm leaders, and it's funny, I feel like almost every one of them, there's a GW Law alum or a BU alum, and there's sort of like a extra special connection somehow. And I don't think people should overlook that. It's powerful.
Well, one thing I'm really interested to learn more about, and I think the audience would be too, is the transition that you made from, being a lawyer to the whole technology world,
Hmm.
right? Like, you did it before it was cool. Like now it's just everywhere, and a lot of lawyers are thinking that, that's a legitimate path is, going into legal tech or what brought that on for you? Like what led to that transition?
So my first day of practice, which was something like September of 1997 or something, my boss at the time called me into his office and he said, Ari, I write a column for this particular publication about we at the time I was doing international trade work, customs kind of work, and he said we write a column for this, which means I write a column for this, which means we now write a column for this. And to his credit, honestly, like we wrote those together, and he always gave me a co-byline. So it's not as if he took my
Mm,
work and said this was his work. It was by
right.
him and me, and I think he also was thinking he's my associate. Sometime at some point, he's going to need to generate business. I want him to have a reputation. I want him to have a profile, and it's just incredible. Taught me such a valuable lesson about that. And I would say, I don't know, 6, 8 months into us doing this column, I said, I've been reading a lot about this internet. It seems very cool. Like, I don't know what it is, and, everyone's talking about it, but the internet is a thing, and we should write about that. Like, I understand the importation of Chinese wood is important to our clients, but can we, is this feather like subject to certain restrictions that you can't put it on a blouse? Right. Those are the kind of, and those are, can you is something officially made in the USA if all of its component parts come from different countries and are assembled, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of really interesting intricacies about international trade, but I felt like, the internet, that seemed like a thing. It
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
rocket science. And so he said, listen, I don't know what, like that's not my focus. And he had a very, very successful career in practice. He's like, but if you want to write, if you can somehow bill your time, write our article and do internet stuff, you go for it and do your thing. And so I would write articles in the middle of the night. Like honestly, that's when do young associates who are already responsible for doing non-billable things, doing extra non-billable things, in the middle of the night. And so I started writing about, the internet. And eventually I had a column in eWeek magazine. So I was writing about domain name disputes or can spam or things like that. And then I wrote for Wired magazine. I wrote
Wow.
the cover story for Computer User several years in a row. I wrote for, at the time also during the heyday of the internet in the late 90s, you'd have these magazines like Red Herring or the Industry Standard. They were like books. There were so many ads in there. There was so much money percolating. It would be like if there was an AI magazine now, right? I mean, it was just
Mhm.
incredible. And so I had a lot of opportunities. I pitched a lot of people. I ended up pitching a radio series on CNET. So I was a commentator for CNET radio. I was on maybe a dozen episodes. I was featured on CNN as a commentator on digital downloading. Like it's very funny. So anyway, so the point is, at some point, the idea that me being a lawyer and me being interested in technology and having a familiarity with the internet issues, just led naturally to legal tech, which initially led to kind of e-discovery, because that was legal tech.
Right.
There was
Right.
practice management and case management, people getting CD-ROMs or what have you, or
Yeah.
floppy disks and then CD-ROMs, etc. And so, yeah, I've been writing about the legal tech and tech for lawyers, etc. since, I would do since the late 90s even. Because I would do feature stories on gadgets for Elle magazine or the National Law Journal. Um, it was super fun. It was great. That's kind of how it started. I was really interested in technology. I was already writing about things, so I would just start pitching stuff. And then eventually I started asking, oh, maybe I can speak about some of these things. I tried to position myself as some kind of tech techno lawyer, internet lawyer, and then it just ended up going in a different direction. I realized that I was passionate about being a writer.
Well, I mean, it sounds like all of that has come together in what you've been doing for all these years as Ari Kaplan Advisors, right? Like that's your thing. Like you are knowledgeable with a deep history in legal technology and teach people about what it is, how to use it to your advantage. And I mean, it sounds like a natural fit. It almost feels like everything was leading towards that.
I do feel like I'm where I should be. It's like if I could have imagined what I'd like to be doing, I feel incredibly grateful that I'm doing it. And I will say we brought up David Schnurman at the beginning of this episode because we met each other all together at Legal Innovators. But I had actually interviewed David and his dad, also a remarkable lawyer and business developer, for my first book. And I think this was 2007. I interviewed them. And David had been doing this sort of interviewing. It was called True NYC. He had a program where he would interview leaders in the space. And David and I were friends before that because we had a mutual friend who had introduced us before the legal industry. And so we've known each other a very long time, and I've admired him for a long time. And so the idea for me wasn't, you mentioned now I know things about technology and I feel lucky that I do, but I've always felt like others know more than I do. And if I could position myself in the center of learning from them, that would enrich what I know and what I'm able to do. And also, if I can somehow amplify their knowledge, everybody wins. The community wins. I win just by having a richer knowledge base. I also, there's also that wonderful aspect of just developing the relationship and the connection with someone that has nothing to do with the profession. And that I think is a much more central part of what I do and who I am in many ways. And I feel lucky. I'm a chip away kind of guy. We start talking about that too. Like I mean, a lot of the things that I've done often and consistently. And I'm a big fan of a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Right.
And in the book, in terms of habits, a lot of it is just about consistency, just chipping away. I swim religiously. I'm sorry, Fridays and Sundays, I almost never miss. I don't have to be like not feeling well or away, but I'm, religious about my swimming. There are certain things that I don't miss. And I think that my work is in some ways part of that. I try to be as consistent as I can. And I think that's been a lucky hallmark of what I've been doing.
I think that's a great habit and discipline to have. And it kind of leads into the last couple of questions I have of all my guests. Like in the first one is with all of these things you have going on, everything from the swimming to writing books to doing keynotes and everything in between, like how do you keep a work-life balance? And is there such a thing?
I feel like I have like a work-life fabric. You know what I mean? I don't mind
Haven't
it. I
heard
don't
that one before.
well, I don't really apologize for it. I just feel like there are threads of my work that run into my life, and there's threads of my life that are part of my work. And I'll give you two examples. So, um, my kids, so I've been hosting something called the virtual lunch for almost 6 years. And I'll mention things I learned on the virtual lunch at the dinner table. Or I'll talk about this incredible, fascinating guest we had, and I'll ask my kids questions about what do you think that the conversation was about? You're wrong. Actually, this is what that was. And on the flip side, I'm a runner, and I started so in 2018, I was invited to speak at Relativity Fest because I'd done some research on behalf of Relativity. And at the time, the conference was being held, I think, in like late October in Chicago, so it'd be dark and cold. And I asked the people on the call, "Hey, is anybody interested in going running with me in Chicago?" And they all started laughing. They were all just like, "Ha ha, ha, you're crazy! Like 6:30 in the morning in Chicago,
Yeah,
it's gonna be dark,
freezing.
it's gonna be freezing cold. That doesn't make any sense." And I was like, "Well, if you wouldn't mind, could you put it on the maybe put it on the agenda? There must be other people who run. It's a huge conference. It's wildly, popular. Can people, maybe someone will." And so they said, "You know what? We'll do that. Fine." And I said, "You know what? Actually, a dear close friend of mine recently passed away. I'd love to make it about like us running together, but me don't make a donation to lung cancer in his memory and in honor of all the you like if that's okay. I'll do it all myself. I'm not asking anybody for anything." And they said, "Sure, that sounds really nice." And it ended up 30 people showed up that day. And it was just so I just can't tell you how wonderful it was to see all these people, and the feedback was like, "I can't believe how great that was. It was a great way to talk to people and meet people. Such a wonderful way to see Chicago's sunrise over the lake." It just everything about it was great. And so that was 2018. So here we
Yeah.
are, now it'll be 8 years later this year, but I've done many of these at many, many different events. And it's sort of like the personal part of me comes into the professional side in the way that the professional side often comes into the personal side. And I just think there's a sort of fabric of that. I definitely try to put barriers and limits in terms of my personal time, but I work for myself. Anybody that works for themselves knows that, this is not a clock in, clock out kind of life. So you need to embrace it and, try to make it part of who you are and what you do. And yeah, I think it's a work like fabric. I like to think of it that way.
I love that.
Yeah.
And actually, one thing before we go to the last question is I just wanted to tie in the work-life balance part with family. And you had shared with me a story about you and your daughter, and you'd go door to door. If you don't mind sharing that story.
No, I think it's really important. So I have two children. They're extraordinary kids. One is 22, almost 23, and has graduated college, and one is 20 and is, as I mentioned, a rising second semester junior, and just studying abroad this semester. So I'm super excited for her. And so when she was 6 years old, I I had read about an individual who, this was a gentleman in Tucson, Arizona, who asked his neighbors to leave a single can of food in front of their homes and he'd go pick it up. And they did. And so I was curious to see if that would work in my suburban little town in New Jersey. And so I sent an email to some of my neighbors, all very generous people. And I said, if you leave a can. So I said to my daughter, we're just sitting around Sunday morning, I don't know, must have pancakes or something. And I said, "Hey, would you walk around with me? I sent a note to these people and I'm so curious if there are cans in front of their house. Maybe we can collect them." And she was like, "That sounds great." She was adorable. She went upstairs. She got like a hat. She got like a notebook with a pen. And I was like, "What's the notebook for?" She's like, "Oh, I got to write down what we collect." And I thought, amazing. And so we get to the first house, and sure enough, there was a can of like green beans or something. And there's my little daughter writing out green beans. And she's like, "Dad, how many E's in green beans?" And, we're just joking around. And it was just wonderful. I couldn't believe like the discussions about colors and letters and numbers and how many and counting. And it actually turned out to be a great exercise. And we ended up doing that for over a decade and delivering thousands and thousands of cans. We spoke at a school. She put a bin in front of her elementary school, and kids would just leave cans in there. And it was a very good lesson about also this sort of consistency, chipping away kind of activity. One can of food, maybe not helping many people. 1,000 cans of food, pretty impactful. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important for a child to know that. I think it's important for an adult to know that. And I think it's also important. My wife and I have always felt like figuring out things you can do with your kids on a consistent basis other than driving them back and forth to things, that they're involved in, but things that you have together. My daughter and I used to do like a subscription to a theater locally. My son and I have, even now as an adult, we are trying to see all the ballparks. So we've been to 19. And so like that's our thing. So like having a thing. So the cans were like our thing. And eventually she would drive to get the cans, and she would drive us to the food bank where we would had consistently been delivering the cans. And it was important that she see where the cans were going. I felt like
Right.
just putting the cans in a bin wasn't as sufficient. I wanted her to see it. And I now actually serve on the board of trustees for that organization. It's called the Apostles House, and it's a wonderful organization that does extraordinary work in Newark, New Jersey.
It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, thanks.
A- And I think it's just a wonderful, way of underlining and highlighting the importance of that balance and still having time for your family.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't overstate like the idea of me and this little child holding hands, walking through our neighborhood, talking about whatever for years. Sometimes, it wasn't in the snow, not as much fun, sweltering heat. And my wife got into it too, because my wife was like, so and so has a can. It became like our thing, and it was just wonderful. So, as much as it was a great community exercise and we were doing something to help others, in the moment, that help also helped us. Like it was this
Yeah.
incredible payback on both sides. It was really wonderful.
Well, with that, let me ask you the last question that I have, which naturally ties in. After doing all of these things that you do, what makes it worthwhile for you?
In my core, I feel like I'm a connector. I'm a community builder, and a lot of the different activities, the thread that runs through it is me trying to connect either buyers to sellers or the informed to the less informed, or people who are trying to find an opportunity to people who have an opportunity. And whether it's the virtual lunch or my runs, or I have a breakfast series called the Legal Tech Mafia, like anything that I'm doing is usually about bringing others together, learning from each other, making sure that people get twice the value that they're putting in. And it's honestly, it's worth it for me in the small benefits that people see, the meeting, lots of people have found whatever that opportunity might be, work, job, friend, through some of the things that I've done. And I feel incredibly grateful. Every once in a while, I'll see someone will say, "Oh, we finally met in person. We met through your virtual this or your that." And I think that that is the best way to do this. It's all about, we're in a very fast-paced, competitive profession. The law itself is that, but now legal tech is that, right?
Yeah.
All the permutations associated with our profession are very hard driving. Everyone is just wow, how smart people are, and how dynamic and how capable. And so, I'd like to think that in my world, what I'm trying to do is connect all of these constituencies to just try to amplify all this exceptional work, but also, many of the stories and personalities that really make it so wonderful.
Well, it definitely sounds worthwhile.
No, it's a privilege. I think of my work as a gift. I always say on LinkedIn, I get to do lucky work. So, a lot of examples of that.
I love that lucky work. Well, Ari, thank you so much for being on my show today.
It's a privilege. I respect what you do, and I'm so glad that our respective podcasts have brought us together. So,
Yeah,
thank you so
thank you so
much.
much for having me on yours too.
It was wonderful.
So, for everybody who's watching, if they want to keep in touch with you and learn more about what you do, how can they reach out to you?
You can visit arikaplanadvisors.com or just email me, arikaplanadvisors.com, and follow me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is LinkedIn, the opportunity maker. So I look forward to connecting.
Well, thanks again, Ari. And I want to say thanks to all of you. This has been a wonderful episode hanging out with Ari, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.